Don't you know that I'm a superstar?
Hello, Celebrity Whisperer fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Celebrity Whisperer. My name is Eric, your humble correspondent and host of the Celebrity Whisperer, a show where I talk about my encounters with the rich and famous. Just an average guy who's met tons and tons of famous people completely by happenstance. Never ever set out to meet any of these people. I met them all completely by circumstance, being in the right place at the right time. So today we're going to talk about the movie Forrest Gump, one of my all-time favorite movies, one of my all-time top 10s, maybe even top 5s of all time. And I've been binge watching the movie again lately, looking at clips and so forth on YouTube. And it was during the course of some of these recent viewings that I realized I had three celebrity connections to this film. And it just dawned upon me, even though I first saw the movie over 30 years ago when it first came out in movie theaters in 1994. The first connection is there's a scene in the movie where the University of Alabama is being integrated, and it's admitting its two first black students in 1963, I believe, and one of them is Vivian Malone. It was Vivian Malone and James Hood, who were the first two to integrate that university. And it turns out Vivian Malone is my cousin. And I had known, of course, through the family connections and ties and having, met and known Vivian, of her history as a groundbreaker in integrating that university. And, when I saw the movie, I just chuckled, hilariously. There's a scene in the movie where Forrest sees Vivian walking into the schoolhouse and she drops one of her books and he stops to help her pick it up and give it to her. Of course, that didn't even happen in real life, but, that's a funny scene in the movie. And it's one of his first scenes where Forrest is enmeshed in American history moments. And, it was very funny. And so, yes, Vivian Malone was my cousin. She was my dad's first cousin. And I had met her on several occasions. Very nice woman. Rest in peace, Vivian. And the second connection is where Forrest meets President Kennedy as a member of the All-American football team. And he shakes his hand. Of course, there's a funny scene where he tells President Kennedy that he has to pee when President Kennedy asks him how he feels. And he shakes his hand. And that reminded me when I was a taxi driver, my first celebrity fare was John F. Kennedy Jr., the president's son, who's portrayed in the film. And I remember taking him from Madison Square Garden, where he had just watched the Knicks game, and took him to the Upper West Side and had a very nice conversation with him. Very pleasant man, very friendly man. And I remember at the ride, I said, I'm going to make sure I shake this man's hand because, I know that I'm shaking history's hand. I mean, and as soon as I did shake his hand when I arrived at his destination and we bid farewell. And I remember his hand felt like, the softest thing I've ever touched. It felt like, like a baby's bottom or a Charmin tissue or whatever. It was the hand of a man who had never done physical labor in his life, manicured and soft and no calluses. It was obvious that, he had never in his life done any kind of physical or manual labor. He had the hands of a wealthy man. So, and when I shook his hand, I felt like I was shaking, his dad's hand. I was shaking the president's hand. This was the president's blood. This was his only son. And I'll never forget that moment. I did later pick up John F. Kennedy Jr. again in my cab later in the year when he was coming out of a movie theater. But and my third connection to the film Forrest Gump was when Forrest, as a member of the All-American ping pong team, travels to China and he comes back to America, and he's interviewed on the Dick Cavett show. Dick Cavett was once a very famous TV host, very popular, and also a passenger of mine in my taxi. In 1990, also the same year, I picked up JFK Jr. I picked up Dick Cavett. Didn't know who he was right away, but I knew his face was familiar, and I couldn't quite place it. Dick Cavett was really a show that, older people than me, when I was 25 years old in 1990, a lot of people my age really didn't know Dick Cavett that well, but I definitely recognize his face as someone who I recognized. I didn't quite able to place it. So I took him to 79th Street and Park Avenue on the east side. And I asked him, I said, "Sir, what's your name?" And he said, "Dick." And I said, "Are you Dick Cavett, the TV host?" And he said, "Yes." And, he smiled, a big smile. And I let him know, I was like, "I couldn't quite place you, but, I knew that your face was someone that I should recognize." And that was enough for him. He was happy enough that I recognized him, and, that I, at least knew that he was somebody that was famous. And so those are my three connections to the movie Forrest Gump, one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion, one of my all-time favorites. And this has been another episode of the Celebrity Whisperer. I look forward to talking to you guys again. Please remember to like, comment, follow, and subscribe on all of my platforms, including TikTok, including Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube, my YouTube channel, The Celebrity Whisperer. Please follow, subscribe, because we have a lot more stories coming. There's a lot more famous people I've met, and I'm anxious to tell you guys about it. So, like I said, like, comment, subscribe, and follow, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you. Subscribe. Thank you.